Good morning, everyone, and sorry for the delay. Welcome to Turkey-Iran Relations and Regional Dynamics panel today. We will discuss the shifting geopolitical landscape in the Middle East, or we try to answer if it is shifting or not, if it is a temporary process. So we have three distinguished speakers with us: Alex Vatanka, founding director of the Iran program of the Middle East Institute; Hakkı Uygur, president of the Center for Iranian Studies in Turkey; and Kadir Üstün, executive director of the SETA Foundation at Washington, D.C. So Alex, let's start with you. Tell us your perspective about what is happening in regards to geopolitical landscape in the Middle East, especially in regards to Iranian-Saudi rapprochement, or can we consider it rapprochement yet, or what will be the, or is it just a temporary process, and what will be the role of the US in the region following that?
Well, thank you very much. Great to be with you. Look, in terms of where we are in the region, I think the big headline, obviously, is that I would probably say all countries in the region, one way or another, are pursuing efforts towards de-escalation. As a whole, the region is just exhausted with the mentality of zero-sum competition in various theaters, particularly areas where you've had security vacuums in the period post-Arab Spring, from Libya to Yemen, Syria, you name it. So the countries of the region overall have come to the conclusion that business as usual cannot continue. They will collectively suffer if they spend the resources that they have to fight each other. And oftentimes they found out that some of these goals that they've been pursuing are actually not worth it. In the case of Iran, Saudi Arabia, I mean, it's pretty obvious that the Saudis, probably since 2017-18, have looked for ways to get out of the Yemen war. War turned out to be very different than that had been planned initially in Riyadh. And I think, I see the Saudi desire to get out of Yemen as a primary factor. They haven't overnight changed their perceptions of the Iranian regime's policies in the region. I'm sure they still have the same concerns. But what has changed in Riyadh's calculations is that for a long time, going back to the Trump administration, Riyadh was hoping that the United States could take the lead and not just contain Iran, but actually sort of push back on some of Iranian regional policies. That didn't happen under Trump. That has not happened under President Biden. And the Saudis simply just couldn't wait, from what I can tell. They have a whole new big agenda ahead of them in terms of Vision 2030, economic development at home, pulling back from the region, pursuing these open-ended, costly regional projects, was always going to be in conflict with the nation-building project that Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince, has in mind. And who's the biggest potential spoiler for Saudi Arabia's economic plans? Well, Islamic Republic is top of that list. So instead of waiting for Washington or anybody else for that matter, the Saudis have decided to take action on their own. And here you are. The talks began in April 2021. Pretty much as soon as the Biden administration came in. And now we are at a point where there's not talk of Saudi investment cooperation with Iran. But as you pointed out, it's early days. We've seen this movie before. In the 1990s, Iran and Saudi Arabia also were able to patch up their differences back then. And that lasted about half a decade, but eventually it fell apart. The question is, will it be different this time going forward? But I really think, and I'm happy to get into the details of this, but I think there's some serious factors on both sides, in Riyadh and in Tehran, that pushed them in this direction. A final point I make, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about, the role of the United States. The fact that the United States was not able to be the party that brought these two countries together is a net loss for Washington. And I know the official position of the United States is that we welcome this rapprochement, and we should. But the fact that the Iranians and the Saudis, for their own different reasons, chose Beijing to announce it was clearly a signal here. And it's a kind of a wake-up call for the United States in terms of, if it wants to stay in the broader Middle East, it really needs to start gaining the trust of the regional states as a leader, because I think that trust has been lost over the last few years. And that's on the United States to to address as soon as it can and to its best ability. Let me stop there.
Hakkı, the same question to you.
Yeah, as Alex said, I agree with everything Alex said. It's too early to have, final conclusion, but it seems that this time, like in 90s, they are serious to achieve this goal. That's why when we heard first time this agreement, I thought, what will happen in Yemen, because Yemen is the most complicated issue between Saudi Arabia and Iran is more difficult than, let's say, Iraq or Lebanon or Syria. But when Saudi officials visited Yemen and when they had meeting with, Houthi leaders, so it seems to me they are serious this time. And of course, another, different aspect this time is China's factor. And we know that, and Saudis said it several times before, if any power in the in the global world can put pressure on Iran, is China, because of all these economic relations. China #1, client of Iranian oil, etc. So this time, I think we can be cautious, let's say optimistic this time. But again, it's too early. We will have to see. And Iran, Alex said about some reasons for Saudi, and Iran has its own reasons. I mean, in domestic policy issues, Iran, had been the scene of, these mass protests for a long time. And everybody observing Iran knows that it's not the only issue. There are plenty of problems with Tehran faced with them, and they need some kind of stability. And as Alex said, everybody exhausted. Iran is the same. Iran is the same, and they need investment. And remember, JCPOA 2 still not on the horizon yet. We had lots of hopes when Biden came to power, and in the White House, everybody expected that we will see another JCPOA soon, but there is no JCPOA. So Tehran cannot lose regional powers and the United States and Western powers at the same time. So I think this time, we need to wait and see, but I think we will see some improvements as we see, in Yemen, in Iraq, and even Saudi Arabia, stated that they are ready to invest inside Iran. I think it's a very big issue. Nobody nowadays is ready to invest, in any shape in Iran, but Saudis very clearly said that. So, of course, we need to see United States, as again, Alex said, they said, yes, we welcome. But we need to see, we can understand they are not very happy because China, their #1 rival, came to the region, and it's the most complicated issue. Everybody knows there are a lot of routes between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It will not be easy. From the first day of revolution in 1979, they have lots of problems, and today even the same. If China succeeded to, reach, peace in this between these two countries, it could be an example for other countries. Even I am following on a Syrian issue. China said that all, for example, foreign countries have to leave Syria. It's kind of, Astana process, supporting of Astana process for other powers. Absolutely, Washington or, United States will not enjoy these two. So we need to see reaction from United States too, in my opinion.
Kadir, the same question.
Well, some interesting things are happening in the region, that's for sure. I think for the first time, we are seeing a US administration that is not coming up with a major policy proposal in the region. The most important one, Hakkı just mentioned it, was supposed to be JCPOA, return to that agreement. We are not seeing that from Washington. Biden administration has basically downplayed that agreement or their lack of. And then, peace process, Israel-Palestine track. No, Washington is not saying much, right? When there's some escalation, they're trying to calm down the tensions. Yemen, no major push. There is some diplomacy going on. I don't mean there's no US diplomacy. What I mean is there's no major proposal. When we look at Syria, the same thing, right? Anti-ISIS campaign, they're having problems with Turkey on that one, of course, for Washington supports the YPG. And then in Iraq too, throughout the region, we don't see a major American proposal to resolve a major policy issue. So many countries, regional countries, have started to talk to each other much more. And I think that's having an impact. And that element, unless Washington decides all of a sudden that they want to come up with some major proposal and they want to align with, let's say, you know, Saudi, Egypt, and create a new anti-Iran front. Unless they do that, I think that will continue. The regional countries, look at Turkey. Turkey is trying to, you know, amend fix relations with pretty much all the countries in the region, from UAE to Egypt and even Syria. This week, you know, defense ministers and intel chiefs met in Moscow with Iran, Turkey, Russia, and Syria. So that was significant. I think that is an important trend, and I expect that to continue, because there doesn't seem to be a newly rejuvenated interest in Washington to try to lead in Middle Eastern affairs. It's very much focused on Ukraine front, you know, and it wants to focus on China. But China's move, bringing Saudis and Iranians together, that actually shows, it should show to Washington that this, you know, confronting China is not going to happen only in Indochina, South China Sea, or in the regions surrounding China only. This is if it's a two global powers and they're going to compete and push back against each other, that's going to happen pretty much everywhere. Africa, Middle East, even on the Ukraine front, right? China is kind of carefully kind of testing the waters about how it can play a role, and it wants to show some diplomatic muscle, but being careful given the US threats about, you know, directly helping Russia. So that dynamic, the global dynamic outside the regional one I just mentioned, these two things I think will continue, at least in the short and medium term. In the long run, if the US does not come up with a more sort of broader, comprehensive policy, I mean, so far what we've heard is, you know, democracies against autocracies, and we don't see many buyers of this, right? Nobody's really aligning with this. Even the Europeans, you saw Macron go to France, to China, sorry, and European leaders are not really aligning with that argument or taking significant action along that line. They are supporting Ukraine, but even that support is subject to many sort of internal disagreements or debates. We saw that with the tank issue, right? The Germans and Americans, for a while, it looked like they were going to fall out. What kind of weapons what kind of tanks, and with what timeline they needed to provide them to Kiev. So, you know, the regional dynamic of intra-regional talks, diplomacy, strengthening, I think that will continue. And at the global level, Washington will need to realize that the competition with China will not happen only in the East. So I think those are two important developments that have a regional bearing as well.
Thank you, Kadir. And I started to receive some questions to our panelists, and I will try to mesh those questions with my own questions Alexander Kravitz is asking, could any of the panelists comment on Iraq's role in setting up the Iranian-Saudi rapprochement? Everyone is crediting Beijing where the deal was announced, but it seems the role Baghdad played is not recognized. Alex, do you want to reflect on this?
No, I mean, it's a good question. The 5 rounds, if I remember right, were all held in Baghdad. I might have to double check that. There's certainly Omani involvement in this as well. So, you know, Iraq had good reasons to want to be a venue. Iraq sees itself rightfully as the theater that would be receiving the brunt of any more Saudi-Iranian tit for tat. It's you know, it's coming out of, we're just around the corner from the 20th anniversary of the US intervention in Iraq. We know what happened in that country, the pains that the Iraqi people have gone through. The country wants to stand on its 2 legs, and it certainly doesn't want geopolitical rivals of the region to use Iraqi territory to settle scores. So Iraq had good reasons to want to be a venue. But I really think fundamentally, you know, that the main drivers were decided and believed in Tehran and Riyadh. As we talked about before, the Saudis needed to get themselves out of the Yemen war to focus at the home front. The Iranians had a number of objectives. One was they genuinely believed that Saudi Arabia financially supporting the Iranian opposition in diaspora was a threat to the stability of the Islamic Republic, particularly the media campaign that the Saudi investors are said, or we know Saudi money has supported Iranian opposition media campaigns against the Iranian state. So that was something that they wanted to have a compromise with the Saudis on, and it seems to have been the case that they have received assurances to that regard. The Iranians did not want to see the Abraham Accords expand. That was another factor. So, you know, when they realized that Saudi Arabia was on the fence, not knowing whether the Biden administration would give to Saudi Arabia what Saudi Arabia expects to normalize or have diplomatic relations with Israel, the Iranians took that as a window opportunity to go in and shape the Saudi calculations and say, actually, let Iran offer you an alternative. And that's where the Saudis decided to take for now. That doesn't mean Saudi Arabia has given up on having relations with Israel. That probably will come down and happen somewhere down the path, but not for now, because that was strategic, not as important as getting Iranian support to end the Yemen conflict. So I would just go back to the point in terms of the question. The role of Iraq should not be underestimated, nor should the fact that Iraq could be one of the major beneficiaries of this, which takes me to a broader point that I hope we can get to discuss today. Look, you know, when you look at regions that spend decades fighting, war, military expenditure, I mean, obviously Europe comes to mind right away. 2 world wars happened on European soil, hundreds of millions of people killed. And at some point in the Second World War, you had the push towards economic integration and looking for ways to build up confidence and make each other, neighboring states, the likes of France and Germany, make each other stakeholders in one another's well-being. So a very much a shift away from the zero-sum competition and looking at international and regional affairs. And look at Europe today. Sure, they have differences, but you were looking at 27 member states in the European Union that by and large trade with one another, have differences. We've seen that over Ukraine. We've seen that all over issues. And in the case of the United Kingdom, they entirely left it. But peace has been preserved for so long, for decades. The Middle East, the broader Middle East, including Turkey and Caucasus, and even if you want to throw in Central Asia here, they need to look for ways where countries can both win. The mentality of, I'm going to do everything I can to take that country out of that theater hasn't worked. It's proven to be impossible. And they've learned the hard way. And it's not just Saudi Arabia that learned it. Iran is learning it, has learned. I would argue Turkey has learned it to some extent in terms of its intervention in Syria and so forth. So I hope, it's early days, but I really hope that the region can move in the direction of economic development, integration, finding ways for the entire region to benefit when possible, or certainly among individual states, for example, Iran and Saudi Arabia, how can they, two of the largest countries in terms of the size of their economies in the Middle East, barely traded with one another, right? $15 million, I think, was the figure of trade between two economies that combined are about $1 trillion. It doesn't make sense. And when you keep each other apart, the way they have kept each other apart, it does not serve the region, and it creates that zero-sum mentality that if I heard the other side, who cares? Well, if you create the conditions where neighbor in your neighbor's or fire in your neighbor's house is the same as your house being on fire, then suddenly the incentive for conflict would diminish significantly, and that would be something the region needs to strive for and look forward to hopefully see sometime soon.
Hakkı, there is, Alex just mentioned Turkey and its potential role in the Middle East in the future. How do you think the Saudi-Iran rapprochement and the recent geopolitical dynamics in the Middle East is affecting Turkey's approach to the Middle East?
I think Turkey is like another country. You know, most of the countries welcome this rapprochement because, you know, the most important countries in the Gulf, one side Persian Gulf is Iran, and other side Saudi Arabia, which affecting, you know, UAE, Bahrain, etc. So it's important because remember, before the Arab Spring, Turkey has already started this kind of, you know, initiative to shape a regional integration. We remember the Shamgan issue, for example, among Syria, Turkey, and even Lebanon and Jordan at that time. Even I remember Iranian official was very eager to somehow join this initiative. But unfortunately, these 10 years or so, you know, after all these, you know, conflict, war, it's more difficult to reach such this kind of, you know, solution. But I think if the Syrian crisis, as you know, Kadir mentioned just yesterday, the ministers of, you know, defense and intelligence chiefs had a meeting in Moscow. It's very important, but I think we need some time to, you know, repair all these ties because the trust between all countries just, you know, disappeared. And all we know, the trust issue is the most important issue when it comes to, you know, shape any, you know, regional initiative, especially when we talk about Iran. You know, we know that after revolution, it's not something new, but after revolution, their threat perception is very wide. Anything happens around them, even Arab Spring, you know, when it comes to Syria, remember, they directly, immediately said that, oh, okay, look, this is, you know, against our national interest. If we don't stop it, you know, in Syria, it will come our cities, etc. So it will take time, but there is a possibility. I mean, I understand Alex's point, but, you know, I'm looking mostly to Iran because all other countries, Turkey is a, you know, somehow soft power country. Whatever Turkey has, you know, it's about the economy, trade, transportation, gas hub, a lot of projects because Turkey is not something, you know, creates, you know, this kind of militia groups, you know, sending somewhere, you know, affecting countries or governments. But in Iran, especially, you know, after the, you know, let's say last 10 years or so, but most specifically after Ibrahim Raisi came to power, there are lots of commanders and intelligence chiefs came to power. And they are very pro-Russia, they are very pro-Chinese figures. So if you look at Iran's initiatives, even the Saudi-Iran rapprochement is mostly, yes, it's, you know, it's kind of cook in Iraq. I agree with that, but China was very important. And remember again, Iran and China had a, you know, signed a, you know, agreement, 25-year strategic agreement. So China's factor was very important. Basically, China said Iranians, I think, look, I need stability. I need because all these, you know, oil resources, and I want to make BRI happen, and I don't want any trouble. So maybe because of these, Iranian, you know, just take a step back. Another issue here, I think, is very important, the Russian factor, because as we know, Iran, on the one hand, didn't recognize the Crimea or other parts of Ukraine as a part of Russia. They didn't vote in UN. But at the same time, they are sending weapons, drones to Russia to use in war. So I think in the region, anything will not happen unless this in global scale, you know, I don't know, maybe as Kadir said, United States will come with a new plan. It's very, you know, I don't see in the near future because basically United States doesn't show any, you know, any eagerness to have any new initiative in the region. As Kadir said, even Turkey, look at Turkey, you know, USA relationship, or just single issue, you know, YPG issue, they destroyed almost all the relationship with Turkey. And in Iran, we know that Iran from the 1979 is anti-USA country. And now Saudi Arabia joins the club. Which country, you know, in the last, let's say, half a century, bought a lot of weapons, you know, made a lot of investment in United States, but still, when it comes to national security, United States didn't provide when Houthis hit the, you know, Saudi Aramco facilities inside the Saudi Arabia. So I think we need to wait, unfortunately, I'm saying that we need to wait what will happen in Ukraine, and more importantly with Taiwan and, you know, between China and United States. Otherwise, I'm afraid any country, China, Russia, United States, can easily destroy this, you know, rapprochement, not only between Iran and Saudi Arabia, in between Turkey and Israel, and between Turkey and Egypt, because there are lots of open files. Yes, we are taking some steps in forward, but we cannot be sure it will, you know, happen in our desire. So I think it's early. Again, even if we establish a regional, you know, integration, like Alex said, in Europe, we need to wait because this war affecting all over the, you know, region. As Kadir said, this China-US confrontation will not happen just, you know, in Chinese borders. Everywhere we are looking Pakistan, we are seeing China's, you know, threats. Whatever, you know, remember 5G issues with United Kingdom and United States and Israel. Remember, you know, USA made a lot of pressure to backdraw to, you know, grant their harbors to Chinese companies. So I think we need to wait more.
Thank you very much, Hakkı. And Kadir, there's a question about, I know the panel is about Turkey and Iran relations, but there are so many questions about the region as well. Robert Friedman is asking, can there be a serious Syrian-Turkey rapprochement unless Turkey agrees to leave Syria?
Well, that's been according to the reports, that's been the demand by the Syrian side. But you come to the negotiation table with the kind of the hardline proposals. I don't think it's going to happen very soon. Of course, this, you know, Syrian side will bring that to the table, and but Turkey's focus is twofold from what I can gather. One is the return of refugees. For that, you need security, you need some sort of functioning system on the ground. And you need security arrangements. You need to ensure that, you know, Assad regime does not do a back deal with another deal with PKK, PYD on the side. So there are quite a few considerations from the Turkish perspective, because before they can, you know, be sure about some sort of stable, secure environment for the return of the refugees, but also that, you know, PKK, PYD not posing a danger to Turkey's borders. Turkey already controls several regions, and, you know, it spends a lot of money trying to keep those areas stable. It spends a lot of political capital also. Remember, at some point, Assad forces were marching towards Idlib, and Turkey stood its ground because it was going to create hundreds of thousands of new refugees flowing into Turkey, perhaps even more than 1 million. Estimates at the time said that. So it is a major concern. And of course, Syrian, you know, the readout, I think, was about the territorial integrity of Syria, which, you know, is the stated policy of all these countries. But, you know, in real terms on the ground, major powers will not leave without a major sort of assurance, I think, major grand bargain, let's say. And of course, this is happening outside without the US. So, you know, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Syria are talking. They just started talking. So it's going to take a while, like Hakkı said, like Alex said, it's going to be a while before they can come to some sort of agreement. But, you know, I don't think Turkey will just leave those areas, because it provides services, it provides security, it provides stability actually in northern Syria, and leaving those areas right now would cause a lot of damage to Turkey's own security. It would create more refugee inflows. So it's not a realistic demand today in the short term. In the long run, it will, I think, depend on a grand bargain, a political deal about the future of Syria. And that's going to be a hard thing. I mean, like Alex said, look at Iraq, you know, the things are still not stable everywhere in Iraq, not by a long shot. So it will take some time for that to happen. But again, Turkey, starting last December, indicating its openness and showing, having these serious meetings between, you know, the defense minister and intel chiefs, that's significant from Turkey's perspective. And after the elections, that process might move even faster, regardless of the election results, because the opposition is also proposing to engage the Syrian regime anyway.
Thank you, Kadir. Alex, you have a question from Hurshid Dingil. How do you assess whether emerging anti-Iranian coalition would affect Turkey-Iran relations, especially Azerbaijan-Iran escalation case?
No, that's a good question. I mean, now we were just earlier talking about what didn't happen, the anti-Iran coalition. For a while, we were talking about the NATO of the Middle East. There's all sorts of discussions and plans and promises of how, particularly around when Abraham Accords happened, how that could develop into maybe a military mechanism to confront Iran. But key members of Abraham Accords, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and so forth, very quickly said, hey, we joined the Abraham Accords not to pick up a fight with Iran, but just to increase the number of friends we have, namely Israel in this case. So that seems to, you know, and you cannot find, in my view, more concerned countries in the region than the smaller Gulf states who look at Iran and genuinely have security concerns about Iranian regional intentions, and in many cases, rightfully so. So when I now turn my attention to Iran's north and look at the South Caucasus, and then I ask myself the question, who would join that anti-Iran coalition? Azerbaijan and Iran, we all know, no secret, they have had ups and downs. Tensions are very high at the moment. But who would join Baku? Should the Republic of Azerbaijan decide to sort of go down the path of confronting Iran militarily? The only country really that, to my mind, will probably be open to that idea, certainly in terms of increasing military cooperation with Azerbaijan, would be Israel. And again, the Israelis have their own very good reasons to want to do that. They are paying back Iran for what Iran calls its forward defense strategy. Namely, that if Iran thinks it has a right to come and base missiles in South Lebanon, guess what? Israel would give itself the same right to go and sit outside of Iran's borders and project power equally. So that, to me, seems like a limited coalition, because that is the Azerbaijani-Israeli military cooperation is a long-standing one. It goes back to the mid-1990s. If I remember my data right, about 70% of Azerbaijan's arms have come from Israel on a given year. So this is not a new development. But would it be expanded? For example, would Turkey join something that looks like an anti-Iran coalition in the South Caucasus? I doubt it. I think, again, Iran and Turkey do not see eye to eye on the South Caucasus. There are, as we can discuss if we get into it, issues that divide them. But Iran and Turkey have a history going back to 1979 of what you can best describe as managing their rivalry. Neither side is really interested in an all-out rivalry or, God forbid, conflict. So they've done this before. Tehran and Ankara know how to compartmentalize their differences. They remain trading partners, and yet there are obviously differences from Lebanon to Syria to even Iraq to Yemen. I mean, Iran and Turkey have had differences in a number of places in the region, but neither side really is willing to go all the way out and perhaps help bring about something that looks like an anti-Iran military coalition. But look, let me also stop by saying this. Right now, we're hopeful that de-escalation is the way forward, but that's only hope. I think certainly the neighborhood, the region would expect from the Islamic Republic of Iran to seriously rethink its forward defense strategy. Because forward defense strategy is formulated and defended by strategists that, as Hakai rightfully pointed out, many come from the Revolutionary Guards. They have a very kind of almost paranoid. Maybe you can't fault them for that. I mean, you have to think of all possibilities. But forward defense essentially comes at somebody else's expense. So if you feel that your national security requires you to be in Syria, then obviously that discounts entirely what Israeli national interest and security concerns are. And that's basically where we are. And that needs to be rethought. So Iran argues almost daily that it believes in national boundaries. Well, I think if they could make a compromise with everybody else in the region about what constitutes being inside your national boundaries, that might just be a great step forward towards something that looks like a sustainable regional de-escalation. But in that environment, the idea of pro-Iranian proxies operating in Iraq or in Syria, that becomes really difficult to sort of see as a reality that can stay. It really needs to be rethought. And maybe it's time for the Islamic Republic to rethink how it looks at its security, because it's very much looked at security from a hard security prism. And as we see with the protests in Iran since September, they have another list of security concerns that are rooted in the state of the Iranian economy. And to fix that, they need to essentially take a step away from the foreign policy of the last 4 decades, if I could go back to 1979, and go in a different direction. And as I was suggesting earlier, that involves looking for ways to build bridges with neighboring states and maybe even internationally. But time will show if Iran has it in terms of vision to go there.
Thank you very much, Alex. And Hakkı, a similar question actually in regards to South Caucasus. What will be your comments on Turkish-Iran relations in South Caucasus? Aram Avettisyan is asking.
Yeah, it's an important one because as far as I see, the tension between Azerbaijan and Iran is a serious one. It's not just, quick-term crisis. When you look at Iranian officials' statements, Iranian media, especially it was last week or 10 days ago, the Iran newspaper, it's an important one. It belongs to the government. You cannot just say, it belongs to IRGC. It's not our control, etc. It belongs to Ibrahim Reis and Iran News Agency. They had an interview with a Husseini militia group. Husseini militia group, like any other, samples in the region, like Hashd al-Shabi, like, Fatimiyun, Zainabiyun, etc., Hezbollah in Lebanon. Usually, Iran used to use these tools in failed states, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq. We didn't see before, Iran used this leverage against a, very well-established country. That's why it was very surprising for me how Iran dared, because bilateral relationship is quite good. If you look at the, economy, trade, any other issue, transportation. Baku and Tehran have lots of relationship with each other. So these threats, and we know this kind of interviews, you cannot just, I'm a journalist, I can do an interview. It came from upside, it's from officials. It was a direction. So it seems to me it's a serious crisis, but as Alex also underlined, he was right. Yes, Azerbaijan is a very important country for us, is our strategic ally. We showed that in Karabakh war, we supported them politically, militarily, every possible way. But on the other hand, the stability inside Iran is also a very critical issue for Turkey too. It's not something new. We have long history, 300 years, written diplomacy we have, archives. But especially after Arab Spring, we saw what happened in Syria. All we remember the first days of revolution in Syria. What we had dream and what happened next. YPG, other issue, terror groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. So I think when it comes to, Iran, Azerbaijan, this tension, if you look at two countries' media, written one, newspapers, social media, for me, it was very interesting to see silence of Turkey. I haven't seen any official statements. I haven't seen any media campaign against Iran. But I remember in Karabakh issue, all Turkish state, it was like Azerbaijan one. It was very similar. Because I think Turkey doesn't see any benefit to increase tension in this region. So we try to, keep calm. And of course, as Alex said, the change in borders, it's not the issue. I mean, sometimes Tehran exaggerated. Nobody wants to change Iran-Armenian borders. They just want to have corridor through Zangezur, between Nakhchivan and other parts of Azerbaijan. So I think it will be fixed at the end of the day because we really know how to manage this crisis. It's not first time. We had a lot of crises with Iran. We could manage. Of course, Israel is important element here. As we know, Iran, anytime Iran says somewhere in the region, Israel's presence there, they hit with, ballistic missiles. They had some, other kind of attacks, cyber attacks, etc. Remember the UAE ports. Remember the Kayaji, Erbil attacks from Iran. And this time, Iran says Israel is, just in our borders. But Baku, always denied that. And Ilham Aliyev, I remember Ilham Aliyev said himself, okay, come and show where is this Israel presence. Yes, we have, some kind of relationship in business, in trade. Even as Alex said, they are buying their weapons mostly from Israel, but it's not against Iran. And I think Iran has to understand some kind, this kind of bilateral relationship with Israel is not necessarily against Iran. Look, just last week, Turkmenistan established diplomatic ties with Israel. And Israel embassy, opened in Ashgabat, just 20 kilometers away from Iranian border. So what will happen next? Iran will attack Turkmenistan. Iran will say, okay, NATO and, they called Turan, corridor will establish here. It doesn't make sense, I think at the end of the day, diplomacy will be, winner because we don't have any other choice. Because when I look to, history between Iran and Azerbaijan, they have basically joint history, common culture, religious, everything. And we see this inside of, these two countries, Azerbaijan and Iran. The society is a similar one. And when we see some sport events inside Iran, like games of tractor football club or some other, basketball or volleyball teams, they are giving some kind of chant slogans anti, governments. So why it has to be happen? Or on the other hand, inside Azerbaijan, there are lots of people got arrested, but they were working until today very freely. Even Ayatollah Khamenei had a representative in Baku, which basically he doesn't have every country. Even remember these Turkish and Azerbaijan, bilateral issues, visa issues. We couldn't, cancel the visa. Basically, Baku used to say, if we, take this visa, and Iran will want the same thing, so we cannot do. I mean, Baku tried to keep some kind of balance between Iran and Turkey. So Iran losing. Iran, in my opinion, of course, have to understand that, they cannot achieve anything with pressure on, Baku. I told my Iranian colleagues, okay, you are complaining about this Baku-Israel rapprochement, but when you put all this pressure on smaller country than you, with these old weapons, with all these military, drills, maneuvers in the border, what will Baku do? They will go towards, Israel more than before. So I think it's an important issue. I think Turkey has a role to reduce this tension. But again, as Kadir said, we will have elections after 2 weeks. And I think it will affect some of Turkish regional policies. As Syria, even Azerbaijan issue was very important. Even Ukraine war will be affected, because I remember some of the opposition leaders said that we will remind Russia that Turkey is a member of NATO. It's very clear message, they will pursue more pro-NATO policies if they came to power. So, of course, it will affect Russia-Iran's relationship with Turkey too. So I think it's an important issue. And another, because I think it's last round, if Iran goes to nuclear, weapons, I want to just have a couple of sentences on that. Because as we talked before, we don't see any JCPOA2 in near future. And until today, yes, Iran didn't go in this way, but it was not because of technical reasons, mostly because of political reasons. We know that Iran has every technological capacity to build a nuclear weapon. For any reason, if Iran goes this way, Turkey-Iran's relationship could deteriorate at that time, because so far Turkey supported it from first day of JCPOA. Even before JCPOA in 2010, we remember that with Brazil, Turkey tried to take initiative and find a diplomatic solution to this problem. Maybe that can change the Turkish position if Iran prefers to have some kind of this acquire a nuclear weapon. That's it.
Thank you very much. And I have we have 6 minutes left, and I have 2 questions. Number one is for Kadir about Israel. What will be Israel's reaction to this new regional dynamics, and especially the Iranian-Saudi rapprochement? Alex just mentioned a little bit about that, but tell us a little more, Kadir.
I think I wanted to piggyback upon both what Alex said and Hakkı said. Of course, every country has their own, security outlook and how they read the region, what they consider as threats, what their assets are. I mean, so far, obviously, Iran has proven that it is capable of making life difficult for anybody and everybody in the region. And it has capabilities like, the drones it has given to Russia to make, a significant impact in places outside the region as well. So, but I think the next stage, if we have lower tensions, and of course, the dynamic with Israel keeps things often heated, right? At the very least, that can, we saw just during Ramadan that things happening inside Masjid al-Aqsa, and then, at some point it looked like it was going to spill over to Lebanon, and that dynamic, will always be there, and Iran will, try to respond and, use its pro-Iran groups on the ground, etc. We know that game will happen. But I want to both talk about what Alex and Hakkı said, that kind of, that doesn't lead to a policy. That creates that shows the regional players that your ability to interrupt things, disrupt things, and you can't do things against Iranian interest in the region. We got that point. But can Iran actually create positive policies, like Alex was saying, win-win policies with Saudi, with Turkey? You know, we don't expect that to happen with Israel, obviously. But so I think if it can show that, that will actually increase Iranian sort of strength and visibility in the region. And that has been often dependent upon what happens with Israel. When tensions go high, Iran, you know, responds in a harsh way, and then it keeps getting isolated because countries don't want to be involved in that dynamic. And with regard to Iran, Saudi rapprochement, this is important, of course. We knew that, you know, the big prize for Israel is to get, you know, normalized relations with Saudi. You know, after the Abraham Accords, there were many reports that they were pushing for Saudi to also join, and that's a big prize for Israel. Now, Saudi lowering tensions with Iran may not make, you know, the Netanyahu government very happy. They would probably prefer another pressure campaign, you know, aligned with Washington, and then, you know, isolate Iran, etc., which in the past basically has failed, not just because of Iran's capabilities, but also unwillingness in Washington to take things to the next level. Trump was willing to do that, but, you know, Biden administration or future administration, they're not going to go to war with Iran in the region. That's not something they want. So Israel's reaction, they're going to wait and see on this agreement. They probably hope to keep Saudis on their side, but Saudis are also trying to do things a bit differently going forward. You know, of course, they were isolated for a while because of Khashoggi issue and others, but now they're trying to do things on the economic side, on the regional diplomacy. So it's an interesting game, but I think it's basically not sustainable in my mind to go back to the, like, you know, tensions between Israel and Iran, and then, you know, America escalates, and then, you know, you take a step back and then go back at it again. That dynamic is basically by now too old, in my opinion, and everybody sees it, and it doesn't produce lasting influence for Iran or for Israel. I mean, Israel, we saw with Netanyahu's, you know, domestic issues, was almost, you know, isolated, and Washington had a hard time handling that. So, not to make this too long, I think Israel's reaction is going to be wait and see. They would, under Netanyahu, they probably would like another pressure campaign to happen, but I think they're going to wait for the next administration, perhaps hoping for a Republican one. Then they can maybe you know, start again. But many things will change by then, probably in the region. So I don't see that happening in the way that Trump did anytime soon.
Thank you very much. And we have only 2 minutes left. And the last question to Alex. How much is Iran, do you think, a threat to the middle corridor, which includes transport and energy routes to Europe by crossing Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Yeah, I know. Look, clearly the Iranians see the middle corridor or any effort that is led by Turkey or others that sidelines Iran as a net loss for them, and projects that need to be opposed. And frankly, the Iranians have good reasons to fear the implications of being sidelined. The probably best example I can give you is the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. You know, that based on what I remember from back in the 1990s, from a commercial point of view, a lot of people made the argument that why doesn't Azerbaijan send its oil to the world markets through Iranian territory. Why does it take this longer path through Caucasus into Turkey? And this, I'm going to link this into the broader issue of where Iran is internationally. Look, back then in the 1990s, the Clinton administration very much opposed Iran being integrated because of differences between Washington and Tehran. And we haven't really moved much. I mean, today, in many ways, the US position is still to give Iran the option, change your foreign policy, and you will see the fruits and benefits of integration. Put this into the global economy. This puts the region, this puts countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, everybody in an awkward position. Because even if they decided, say collectively, we want to integrate with Iran, they can do so, but only to an extent. Because the problem they will find is that, countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia and UAE, they are integrated into the global economy. Corporations don't have issues going to Ankara, Istanbul, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and worry about sanctions, right? They can go and they can look at the project based on its commercial value and merit. When it comes to Iran, this is the second most sanctioned country on earth today. Companies are just scared to touch anything to do with Iran. And that's the problem. And that goes back to the issue of what Iran opts to choose for itself going forward. Yes, as Kadir said, Iran can choose to become North Korea. But if it wants to become, as Iranian politicians like to point out, Japan of the Middle East or Germany of the Middle East, well, it needs to change its foreign policy because that's the only way it will have a free hand to fix its economy, which I think in the long term serves Iranian security interests on a whole host of levels, much better than supporting a group of proxies here and there in the region in pickup trucks and Kalashnikovs that can very much damage, be spoilers, but aren't exactly going to bring money into Iranian state coffers to improve the living standards of the Iranian people, which is the main challenge of the Islamic Republic today. So with that note, let me stop. Kilic.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the panelists, and thanks for all those participated the panel and directed questions. We'll probably continue to have this conversation in the future. Now we are ending the panel here. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.